It was the middle of May in 2008, and the town of Marshall, Minnesota was winding down for the night. The sky was cloudless, the air sharp with the kind of cold that doesn't belong to spring but clings anyway, a final echo of winter's refusal to let go. Farmhouses dotted the endless fields in all directions, like the last beacons in a sea of nothingness. Streetlights along the small roads gave off a dull yellow glow, but beyond them, the dark stretched uninterrupted for miles. Brandon Swanson, just 19 years old, had been attending a small celebration. Classes at Minnesota West Community and Technical College had just ended. The mood at the gathering had been light. Nothing unusual. Just a few friends, a few drinks, the comfort of youth and familiarity. Brandon had studied wind energy and seemed to have a plan for his future. He wasn't reckless, wasn't lost. He had everything ahead of him. When he got in his Chevy Lumina that night to drive home to Marshall, no one thought it would be the last time he was seen. He never made it. At around 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents. He told them he had driven his car into a ditch. He wasn't hurt. He sounded calm, even a little annoyed with himself. He thought he was near Lind, a small town not far from Marshall. He asked them to come get him. There was no panic in his voice. Not yet. His parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, got out of bed and headed toward where Brandon thought he was. They drove up and down the dark country roads, searching, flashing their headlights, trying to spot any sign of him or his vehicle. But they didn't see anything. No car, no sun. They called him back. He answered immediately. "I can see the lights of Lind," he told them. "I'm walking toward them." That was the beginning of a 47-minute phone call, long, strange, and haunting. During that time, Brandon continued walking along gravel roads, trying to guide his parents over the phone. He kept describing where he was and what he was seeing, but nothing he said matched what his parents were seeing. It was as if they were in two completely different realities. He swore he was near Lind. He could see the glow of the town, but he wasn't. When they eventually found his car the next day, it was in a ditch near Taunton, about 25 miles from Lind in the opposite direction. Somehow, Brandon had become completely disoriented, or perhaps he had been somewhere he didn't want to explain. That night, the conversation between Brandon and his father took on a tone that would etch itself permanently into their memories. Brandon was frustrated. He didn't understand why they couldn't find him. He kept walking, the gravel crunching under his shoes, the night swallowing the sound. There were moments of silence, long pauses where neither he nor his father spoke. Then Brandon would say something again, mention a fence line or a field or a distant light. The final moment of the call was brief and devastating. "Oh shit." That's what Brandon said, clearly, sharply. Then the call ended. No one has heard from him since. At first, Annette and Brian Swanson assumed his phone had lost signal or died. They tried calling back. No answer. They drove the area for hours, circling, calling his name out into the vast open land. Nothing. As the sun came up, they went to the police. But, as is too often the case in disappearances involving young adults, the authorities didn't take immediate action. They suggested that maybe Brandon had just gone off somewhere. He was 19 after all, an adult, free to disappear if he wanted to. The implication lingered unspoken. Maybe he had been drinking. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was hiding out. But Annette and Brian knew better. Their son had called them for help. He hadn't sounded intoxicated or impaired. He'd sounded like a young man trying to get home. It wasn't until later that day that a search was launched. They found Brandon's car, abandoned, undamaged, stuck on the edge of a gravel road near Taunton. It was an odd place to end up if he'd really thought he was near Lind. Investigators couldn't explain the discrepancy. Cell phone tower records would later confirm that he had been closer to Taunton than to Lind when he made the call. That meant everything he told his parents was wrong. Or perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps he saw what he thought were town lights. Or perhaps he had been followed, chased, or intentionally misled. But by whom? And why? Dogs were brought in. They traced his scent from the car down the gravel road, along the edge of a field, and to the Yellow Medicine River. Then they lost the trail. Did he fall in? Did he try to cross and drown? The river wasn't particularly deep in that area, but it had steep banks and a thick underbrush. In theory, someone could slip in, especially in the dark. But the river had been dragged. Search teams went up and down for days. Nothing was ever found. No shoes, no body, no trace. It was as if Brandon had simply evaporated into the night. Theories began to spread, as they always do. Some thought he had died accidentally and his body was simply never found. Others believed something more sinister had happened. That someone had picked him up on the road after the call ended, or that he had stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. Drug activity, a hidden property, an armed stranger. It was all speculation, but speculation wrapped in a cold, rural silence. Because what struck people most was how close he had been to his parents, less than an hour away by car, on the phone with them the entire time, and still they never found him. For the Swansons, the days that followed stretched into a living nightmare. Their son had vanished into thin air. There was no crime scene, no evidence, just a call that ended with a phrase that would haunt them forever. Oh, shit. 2 words, a final breath into darkness, a moment of realization, fear, or pain. No one knew what he saw, what he heard, what made him say it. And no one would know for years to come. To this day, Brandon Swanson remains missing. The area around where his car was found has been searched dozens of times with cadaver dogs, divers, and ground-penetrating radar. Still nothing. His phone was never recovered. There's no financial activity, no confirmed sightings. Just a 19-year-old who walked into the night and never came back. His case remains open, officially unsolved. But unofficially, it has turned into a ghost story. A tale told in quiet, nervous voices. A warning to travelers on lonely roads. The boy who vanished while his parents listened helplessly on the other end of a cell phone. The farmland remains the same. Vast, cold, and indifferent. Miles and miles of fields, fences, and riverbeds. They say the land doesn't give up its secrets easily, and in Brandon's case, that has proven heartbreakingly true. Time moved differently after Brandon vanished. For his parents, every second became a quiet scream. The house that once held warmth and routine now pulsed with silence, broken only by the faint echo of a memory. His laugh, his footsteps, his voice on the other end of a phone line saying, "I see the lights." In those words lived a strange duality, hope and despair, clarity and confusion. The lights he thought were Lynn's. What were they really? What did he see? Authorities retraced the call. Cell tower records painted a stark contradiction to Brandon's certainty. The pings placed him not near Lynd at all, but northwest, near Taunton. That discrepancy mattered. It wasn't just a directional error, it was a chasm. It meant Brandon believed something that wasn't true. It meant the ground beneath the story had shifted from factual to unknowable. Either he was wrong, or something else was going on, something more disquieting. As search teams swept the area, volunteers from neighbouring counties joined in. Foot by foot, they combed the tall grasses. Farmers opened their land, and neighbours walked with flashlights, calling his name into the growing dark of each passing evening. Search dogs followed Brandon's scent from his vehicle, across a gravel road, down a ditch, along a field, and finally to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. There, the trail vanished like mist. Dogs circled, then stopped, as if the night itself had swallowed him. But if Brandon had fallen into the river, where was his body? Diving teams scoured the water repeatedly. Sonar equipment mapped the bottom. Cadaver dogs were brought onto boats and sent to the riverbanks again and again. No scent hits, no bones. Not a single piece of clothing surfaced. No blood. Nothing that belonged to Brandon Swanson was ever found beyond that gravel road and the mystery of a phone call. It was as though he stepped off the edge of reality. The river wasn't especially deep that spring. Swollen, yes, from rain, but not so treacherous that it could erase all evidence of a human body. Investigators admitted that had he drowned, something, anything, should have surfaced. But there was no trace. It was a black hole in rural America, a pocket of nothing where a boy once walked. More chilling still were the last words spoken on the call. "Oh, shit." What made him say it? Was it a reaction to slipping on mud, tripping into water, confronting an animal in the dark? Or was it something else, something human? Did he see a light that wasn't the town? Hear footsteps behind him? Did someone step from the cornfields just as he realized he wasn't alone? Theories became shadows, speculative shapes that loomed larger with each unanswered question. Some locals suggested Brandon had been met with foul play. Rural Minnesota, for all its quiet, holds secrets. Methamphetamine use, though not rampant, had carved itself into certain corners of Lyon and Lincoln counties. Abandoned buildings, deserted barns, and grain silos served as hideouts for those who preferred to stay unseen. What if Brandon had stumbled into something, a deal, a lab, a confrontation with someone who had reason not to be found? But then, why the lack of evidence? His phone had not been used again. No one accessed his bank account. There were no texts, no emails, no signs of any planning to disappear. And Brandon had shown no signs of distress before that night. He was close to his family, emotionally stable, academically engaged. He wasn't the type to run. He had called his parents for help. That doesn't line up with someone planning to vanish. That phone call became the anchor of the case. Every word dissected, every pause scrutinized. His parents remembered the tension, the growing frustration in his voice as they failed to find him. They'd been flashing their headlights, driving the rural roads where he said he was walking. But nothing. They couldn't see him. He couldn't see them. It's the stuff of nightmares. Your child out there, calling for help, and you are physically unable to reach them. And then, gone. Cut off. The police, initially hesitant, eventually acknowledged the strange nature of the case. A missing persons report was filed, and search efforts intensified. But with no confirmed location, the investigation spiraled outward like a map, unfolding with no center. The only constant was the dread. People began to speculate about whether Brandon had been hallucinating. Had he consumed something that affected his perception? Toxicology would be impossible now, of course, and his parents swore he hadn't sounded intoxicated, just confused and frustrated. He wasn't slurring. He was logical, talking them through landmarks, thinking out loud. It wasn't the behavior of someone impaired beyond reason. There were fields near the river, and farmers searched them extensively. But there were also silos, underground drainage culverts, and even old wells that had been sealed for decades. Local legends sprang up about the land itself. Some people said Brandon had fallen through the cracks of a place not meant to be understood. Others whispered that he'd wandered onto land he wasn't supposed to see, property owned by the wrong kind of people. Law enforcement didn't support those rumors, but they couldn't disprove them either. Years passed. The fields were harvested, plowed, frozen, thawed, and grown again. Seasons circled the land like clock hands, and still no trace. What disturbed everyone wasn't just that Brandon had vanished. It was how completely. As though the world had reached out and plucked him from its fabric. The night offered no answer. The land, no clue. Just silence. His parents didn't stop looking. They became advocates for changing how missing adult cases are handled. Their frustration with the delayed response became a mission. In Minnesota, if an adult goes missing, even under suspicious circumstances, the police aren't obligated to launch an immediate search unless there's evidence of a crime. That technicality, that gap in protocol, cost them precious time. They helped push for Brandon's law, which would require authorities to begin prompt investigations for all missing adults, regardless of age or assumption of voluntary absence. The law passed in 2009, just 1 year after Brandon vanished. It was a victory carved from grief. But it wasn't closure. The Swansons still walk those roads. Every anniversary, every cold May night, they return to the place his car was found. They speak to reporters with strength that seems borrowed from something deeper than exhaustion, something rooted in love and relentless hope. They search not just for their son, but for truth, for understanding, for something, anything that can end the waiting. They've walked through cornfields at dusk, past silent windmills and rusting fences, listening for something that never comes. They speak to the earth like it might answer, like it might finally offer back what it took. But it doesn't. It stays quiet. And somewhere out there, the lights Brandon saw, real or imagined, still flicker in memory. Were they farm lights, distant houses, or something more cryptic? Could he have mistaken reflections, or was he near something nobody ever searched? That night, when he said he was walking toward the town, he sounded sure. What town? What lights? What moment caused that final panic? The word vanish is too passive for what happened. It suggests a kind of magic, a sleight of hand. But this wasn't illusion. It was a 19-year-old boy reaching out, step after step, breath after breath, and still being lost in full view of the world. Not vanished. Stolen. Silenced. Some believe Brandon is still out there somewhere, buried under an unmarked patch of earth, beyond the radius of scent or sonar. Others believe he fell prey to something human, something malicious. A wrong turn at the worst possible moment. A passing car. A stranger's intent. Whatever happened, it happened quickly. One moment he was there. The next, he was a cold case. And yet, Brandon remains present, in lore, in legend, in grief. His name is spoken in hushed tones by those who knew him and shouted by those demanding justice. His absence is a hole that refuses to close. And as each year passes, the questions only deepen. Because if someone can disappear so completely with a working phone, with family listening live, in the middle of familiar farmland, then what does that say about the rest of us? How close is any one of us to the edge of silence? The field where his scent ended still stands. The river still runs, and the sky, that vast and ancient ceiling, still holds the echo of his last word. Oh shit. The farmland didn't change. It remained as it always had, an endless sprawl of sky and soil stitched together by gravel roads and fencing wire, indifferent to the passage of time. While the world moved on, while people forgot the name Brandon Swanson, that quiet stretch of western Minnesota became sacred ground for the ones still searching. It was more than just fields now. It was evidence. It was memory. It was the final known backdrop to a young man's life before the earth swallowed him whole. Searches continued, not just with hope, but with desperation. Law enforcement cycled through seasons of effort. New dog teams, new sonar sweeps, aerial drones, underground radar. They rechecked areas already combed, hoping something had shifted beneath the surface. Cadaver dogs were reintroduced in later years, brought back to the exact locations where Brandon's scent had once led. But every time, they stopped in the same place, at the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. Not beyond, not across. There was no evidence he ever entered the water. It was the last breath of the trail, like the final page of a book, missing its ending. His car remained a frustrating clue. There was nothing suspicious inside. No damage, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just an abandoned vehicle, exactly where he said it had gotten stuck. It looked as if he'd calmly stepped out, locked the door, and started walking. The problem was where it was found, 25 miles from where he believed he had been. Brandon had been absolutely certain he was near Lind. He insisted he could see its lights. His voice had been steady, confident. But Brandon had been wrong. So very wrong. Investigators started to wonder whether Brandon had experienced some sort of disorientation that night. Not intoxication. His parents insisted he didn't sound impaired. Instead, they considered something more subtle. Could he have had a mild concussion? An undiagnosed neurological event? A panic response triggered by getting stuck in the dark? It was speculation, but it offered a fragile explanation for the geographical error. Yet, even that theory couldn't account for how composed he was during the call. Brandon had been navigating. He was instructing. He was lucid enough to stay on the phone for 47 minutes. That's not the behavior of someone in mental distress. Then came the darker ideas, the ones people whispered when the sun went down and the wind moved through the grass just right. What if he wasn't alone? The notion of a second person, unseen, unheard, somewhere in the margins of that night, unsettled everyone who heard it. Brandon's last word before the call dropped wasn't a soft exhale or a confused mumble. It was panic. Ah, shit. Sudden, immediate, final. The tone suggested surprise, shock, maybe fear, but not confusion. Something happened at that moment, and whatever it was, it didn't leave a trace. Locals began revisiting their memories of that night. Did anyone see a stranger? A parked vehicle? Hear dogs barking unusually? But the roads were quiet, farmhouses dark. Brandon's disappearance happened so silently that even the land didn't notice. If there had been a predator, a human one, it would have taken someone who knew the terrain well, someone who could vanish without leaving evidence behind. People in small towns know each other. They know each other's rhythms, but they also know how to keep secrets. Law enforcement wasn't ruling out foul play, but they had nothing to go on. No tip, no person of interest, no lead with weight. Just that voice on the phone and a location where the trail died. Then came the sightings, or at least what people believed were sightings. Over the months and years following Brandon's disappearance, stories began to surface. A teenager seen walking near an abandoned barn. A figure matching Brandon's description spotted from a distance across a field. A young man hitchhiking, silent, distant-eyed. But every tip ended the same way. Inconclusive. Sometimes it was a case of mistaken identity. Other times, it was wishful thinking. But one thing was consistent. Everyone wanted Brandon to be found. At night, his parents often replayed the final call in their minds. Not the words, but the feeling of it. The helplessness of driving while your son is out there somewhere, alone, frightened, and you can't reach him. For Brandon Swanson, the guilt came in waves. He'd been the one talking to Brandon when the call cut out. He'd been the last to hear his voice. Every silence after that felt like a betrayal. Annette Swanson described the grief as circular. It never moved forward. It just looped around, tightening with each year. They held on to each other. They held on to the hope that someday, they would have an answer, even a terrible one, even the worst one, because not knowing is a cruelty all its own. They became advocates, not just for Brandon, but for every missing adult. They learned quickly how the system fails people, how laws, policies, and paperwork can waste the most crucial hours. They met families like theirs, standing on the same edge, looking into the same void. Brandon's law changed Minnesota. Now, when someone over 18 disappears under suspicious or unexplained circumstances, law enforcement is required to initiate an investigation immediately. There are no waiting periods, no assumptions of voluntary disappearance. It was a major shift, but for the Swansons, it came 1 year too late. Back on the land, everything looked the same, but the weight of what happened had changed it forever. A simple gravel road now carried the memory of a voice. A tree line now cast a shadow longer than its height. A river that had once been just water was now a symbol of absence, of what cannot be explained. Theories shifted. One popular idea suggested that Brandon may have tried to cross the river in the dark and slipped. If that were true, and his body was caught beneath logs or sediment, decomposition and river movement might have erased evidence. But the search teams had checked for exactly that. Dredging, dogs, sonar, again and again. The area wasn't big enough to hide a body forever. So if not there, then where? Some began to wonder if Brandon had walked further than anyone had assumed. What if, after the call dropped, he kept moving, disoriented and scared? What if he collapsed in a drainage ditch far from the river? Minnesota's rural terrain is vast, but not impassable. And Brandon had a purpose. He was trying to get home. Still, even that theory falters under scrutiny. With every inch of that land scoured multiple times by ground and air, the odds of missing something that significant began to shrink. After so many years, the likelihood of a full body recovery diminished, but something, anything, should have surfaced. A shoe, a piece of clothing, a wallet, but the land remained silent. Psychics called in. Unsolicited letters poured into the Swansons' home. Some claimed visions. Others claimed knowledge. A few demanded payment. It was noise. Cruel noise. Grief has a way of attracting vultures. But through it all, the Swansons remained grounded. They listened to everything, even the outlandish. Because when your child is missing, no possibility is too strange to consider. One theory emerged that chilled even the most logical minds. What if someone had been out there that night? Not a stranger, but someone local, someone who knew Brandon, or at least saw him and decided to act. There are ways to disappear a person in rural America. Deep pits, abandoned wells, old barns sealed shut for decades. Places no one would think to check, or even remember exist. But if that's true, then someone knows. And they've stayed silent all these years. Silence. That's what this story keeps returning to. The silence of the land. The silence of the phone after the final word. The silence of the investigation as leads dried up. But it's not an empty silence. It's charged, heavy, full of things unspoken, like a presence in the room that doesn't move but refuses to leave. In the years that followed, people began to speak of Brandon Swanson not as a missing person, but as a symbol of how fragile safety is. How easily one misstep, one turn, one moment of confusion can become a permanent fracture. His story became cautionary, almost mythic. But for his family, he never became a symbol. He remained Brandon, their son, the kid with a sharp sense of humor and a future unfolding. A real person, not an idea. They never held a funeral. How could they? There was no proof of death, no evidence of anything beyond a word and a disappearance. Their grief had no ritual, no boundary. It stretched endlessly, as infinite as the sky that swallowed their boy. Even now, when the wind blows across the fields near Taunton, some say it sounds like someone calling. A trick of the air, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe the land remembers. Maybe it's trying to tell us something. As the years passed, Brandon Swanson's name slipped from headlines, but never from the hearts of those left behind. His parents refused to let silence win. They kept his story alive year after year, attending missing persons conferences, supporting other grieving families, and urging authorities not to forget. Still, their eyes always turned back to the fields. The same desolate gravel roads, the same riverbanks, the same dead-end trails. The answers, if they existed, were still out there somewhere beneath that wide, pitiless sky. The rural Midwest has a strange way of holding secrets. It's not the shadows that hide things, but the light. Open space so vast that anything lost feels like it was never really there. You can look across acres of farmland and feel watched without seeing a soul. Isolation lives in the wind. And somewhere in that stillness, Brandon's story remains frozen at 2:15 a.m. in a single panicked breath. What happened in the seconds after he said, "Ah, shit"? It's the most vital question, the one that hangs over the entire case like a storm cloud that never bursts. Did he see something? Did someone approach him? Was there an animal in the brush? A drop into water? Did he fall? Was he pushed? Or was it something far more complicated, a convergence of bad luck, disorientation, and time running out? There is no physical evidence of foul play. No trail of disturbed grass. No second set of footprints. No tire marks beside his own, but that absence itself feels unnatural. People don't just disappear, not entirely, not in the middle of a phone call. Logic says he must be somewhere. But logic doesn't always apply to missing person cases. Sometimes, the world stops making sense the moment someone vanishes. The Swansons kept pushing. They pressed law enforcement to revisit areas, double-check cell tower data, expand their radius. They walked new grids themselves. Every time they returned to the spot where the scent trail ended, they found themselves reliving that night, chasing a voice through the dark, hoping the air would give them something back. Experts were brought in, retired detectives, GPS specialists, psychologists. Each tried to map out the route Brandon might have taken. They reconstructed the timeline using his final call, environmental data, and terrain analysis. But the variables were overwhelming. How fast was he walking? What if he veered off the road? What if his estimate of direction was wrong? How long did he survive after the call dropped? Hours? Minutes? At one point, searchers considered the possibility that Brandon had climbed over a fence line to shortcut toward what he believed was Lind. That fence ran parallel to the river for a stretch before cutting across a soybean field. A person in the dark, thinking they were heading toward town, might have chosen the shortcut. That would have led him dangerously close to water, muddy, slick, and unpredictable in spring. Still, nothing turned up. Some began to suggest Brandon could have made it farther than anyone assumed, well beyond the initial search radius. His scent might have been masked by shifting weather or scattered by wind. Rural Minnesota is a tangle of cornfields, drainage systems, culverts, and hidden ravines. There are places a body could go unseen for years. But again, so many of these areas had been searched, some multiple times, with cadaver dogs trained to detect even faint remains. If Brandon had perished out in the open, the odds favored discovery, but the land held its silence. His disappearance exposed a terrifying truth. The modern world gives us a false sense of security. We live in an age of constant communication, phones, GPS, cameras, but Brandon was on the phone with his father for nearly an hour and none of it helped. The call connected, but the world around him vanished. Technology couldn't save him, and once the call dropped, he became a ghost in a digital age. Over time, theories only grew stranger. Some suggested he had been abducted after the call ended, perhaps by someone hiding along the road or driving past at just the wrong time. Others claimed he had a mental break and chose to vanish intentionally, but that theory didn't hold. People don't fake disappearances after calmly asking their parents to pick them up. His last words were not staged. They were real, raw, sudden. There were darker theories, ones involving rural trafficking rings, secret storage sheds, or off-the-grid individuals who might have seen Brandon as a threat. These were the kinds of stories law enforcement won't entertain without evidence. But they simmered online, in forums and comment sections, among people unwilling to believe Brandon's story ended in water or a ditch. Perhaps the most disturbing theory is the most mundane, that Brandon is still out there, somewhere, undiscovered, not because he was hidden, but because he was simply missed, that he fell into a ravine, or into the mouth of an old culvert, or was buried beneath thick brush that no one ever thought to look beneath. Maybe time and weather conspired to make him disappear beyond visibility. That's a hard idea for people to accept, that a human body can be lost so completely in an area so familiar. No, the Swansons don't dismiss any theory. They've learned that certainty is a luxury only the fortunate have. They speak with grief counselors and forensic experts, hoping one day something new will surface. They attend every vigil, light every candle, keep every anniversary alive. And they hold out hope, not just for discovery but for resolution. They don't need miracles. They just need to know. In time, Brandon's case became a touchstone in Minnesota for missing persons advocacy. His photo, earnest-eyed, young, remains etched on posters and websites. It's the image of possibility, of a life interrupted. He didn't vanish into nothing. He was part of a family, a community. He had plans. He mattered. Law enforcement still receives occasional tips. A hiker finds bones in a field. A fisherman spots clothing near the water. Each time they respond. They follow leads, but every test comes back the same. Not Brandon. The false hope hurts more than silence. His parents dread the phone ringing, but also dread it not ringing. It's a strange prison, trapped between the past and the unknown. One spring, several years after his disappearance, a group of volunteers initiated another independent search. They expanded their radius by several miles and brought in advanced drones. They walked every fence line, mapped terrain with thermal imaging, and sent dogs through dry creek beds. Still nothing. The conclusion was chilling. If Brandon's body had been nearby, nature had reclaimed it. But that conclusion never satisfies, because deep down, there's the gnawing question: what if they've been looking in the wrong place all along? It's entirely possible that the search was focused too narrowly, anchored by the assumption that his car's location matched his phone's. But what if Brandon had walked farther, or had been picked up by someone who drove him elsewhere? The entire search strategy could have been based on a false premise. And that's what makes the case feel impossible. How easily one detail can send everything down the wrong path. So the farmland endures. It absorbs the seasons, the sorrow, the endless feet of searchers. It drinks the rain. It hums with wind turbines and sighs beneath the weight tragedy. It keeps the secrets Brandon couldn't finish telling. And still, no one has come forward, not after all these years. If someone knows what happened, if someone was out there that night, hiding in the dark, watching a teenager walk alone, they've remained silent. That silence has become a kind of complicity, a wound that never closes. The Swansons know the odds. They understand the statistics. But hope doesn't operate on logic. It lives in the gaps, between seasons, between phone calls, between the spaces in which a boy might still be found. They've spoken to Brandon every day since he disappeared. Not aloud, just quietly. In prayers, in dreams, in the spaces between breaths. His voice remains with them. "Oh shit," he said, and then nothing. That nothing is where this story ends. A boy walking through the dark. A father on the other end of a phone. The lights of a town that wasn't there. And a final, startled gasp into silence. Brandon Swanson vanished on May 14th, 2008. He was 19 years old. He has never been found.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share